Empire of silver, empire of debt, Spain's rise and fall, and the warning signs for America. Opening the globe turns. Picture a globe turning slowly in the dark. Oceans gleam. Continents drift past like memory. And then the globe stops on the Iberian Peninsula, a corner of Europe that, in the late 1400s, was not yet the center of the world, not yet the ruler of oceans, not yet the master of continents. And yet, within a century, Spain would command an empire so vast that people would say, the sun never sets on it. Spain's empire would stretch across Europe, across the Americas, across Africa's coasts and islands, across the Pacific to the Philippines. It would become the first, truly, global superpower. But empires don't just rise. They change the world and are changed by it. They accumulate wealth and then find that wealth has hidden costs. They win wars and then discover that victory can create new enemies. They build systems of control and then learn those systems can become traps. And Spain, at its peak, looked unstoppable. Yet Spain fell into a long decline that transformed it from the dominant global power into a nation struggling to hold on to influence, territory, and economic stability. That's the historical story. But here's the modern question. Why does this story feel familiar? Because many of the pressures that strained Spain's empire, military overreach, financial dependency, political polarization, rising competitors, and a changing global order are the very same pressures that analysts debate in the United States today. This documentary explores the rise and fall of the Spanish Empire. Then it carefully draws parallels, not to claim that history repeats exactly, but to ask what patterns might rhyme. Empires don't usually collapse in one dramatic moment. They decline through choices, through incentives, through habits that once worked until they didn't. Chapter 1. Spain before the Empire. To understand Spain's rise, you have to meet Spain before it was Spain. For much of the Middle Ages, the Iberian Peninsula was a patchwork. Kingdoms and cultures overlapped. Christian kingdoms in the north, Muslim-ruled territories in the south, shaped by centuries of Islamic governance, scholarship, trade, and architecture. This long era produced conflict, but it also produced exchange ideas, science, agriculture, and complex city life. Then came a turning point, the union of two crowns. In 1469, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon married. It wasn't romantic myth, it was statecraft, a dynastic strategy that joined two powerful kingdoms and formed the core of a new Spanish state. But union alone isn't empire. Spain's early power was built on three forces working together. First, political consolidation, a monarchy with increasing authority over nobles and institutions. Second, religious unification, a drive to define national identity through Catholicism, often enforced harshly. Third, military momentum, a centuries-long campaign that ended with a symbolic victory. In 1492, Spain completed the Reconquista with the capture of Granada, the last major Muslim stronghold in Iberia. 1492 becomes one of those years that sounds like myth because so much happens in it. Granada falls. Spain pushes for religious unity with policies that force conversion or exile. And, in the same year, a Genoese navigator sails west. Christopher Columbus leaves with royal backing and arrives in the Caribbean, opening a new era of conquest, colonization, and global transformation. Spain's empire begins not just with ships, but with a worldview, a belief that expansion was destiny, wealth was providence, and power was proof of divine favor. Chapter 2. Conquest and the birth of a global empire. The Spanish conquest of the Americas is often summarized in a few names, Cortés, Pizarro, but the reality was larger, more brutal, and more complicated. Hernán Cortés arrived in Mexico in the early 1500s and became entangled in the politics of the Aztec world. Spain did not defeat the Aztec Empire with Spanish strength alone. It exploited local rivalries, alliances, and resentment toward Aztec domination. Disease did what swords could not. Smallpox and other illnesses devastated indigenous populations with terrifying speed. Societies collapsed not only from war, but from demographic catastrophe. In the Andes, Francisco Pizarro captured the Inca emperor Atahualpa, exploiting a civil conflict within the empire. Again, conquest came through opportunism, violence, and the breakdown of existing structures under unprecedented biological shock. Spain gained control over vast territories and, more importantly, over something Europe craved: silver, mountains of it. The mines of Potosi in modern Bolivia became legendary. So did the flow of precious metals through Spanish ports, into European markets, and eventually into global trade networks. This silver did not just enrich Spain, it altered world history. Spanish bullion helped fund European wars. It flowed into Asia to buy goods. It tied the Atlantic world to the Pacific. It accelerated a truly global economy. Spain was no longer just a European kingdom. It was an imperial machine. And to manage that machine, Spain built institutions, viceroyalties, bureaucracies, legal systems, religious missions, and trade monopolies. But here's the first lesson of empire. Control looks strong on maps. It is much harder in reality. Chapter 3. Spain's Golden Age. Power, culture, and confidence. By the mid-1500s, Spain reached an extraordinary peak. The Spanish Habsburgs, especially under Philip II, ruled an empire that extended across continents. Spain became a major naval power. Its fleets protected treasure convoys and fought rivals across the Atlantic. Spain also experienced a cultural golden age. Art, literature, and architecture flourished. The era produced great painters, writers, and a sense of grandeur that still shapes how Spain remembers itself. But golden age can be misleading. Even at the height of wealth and culture, Spain's empire rested on fragile foundations. Spain was rich, but much of that wealth came from extraction rather than productive growth. Spain was powerful, but much of that power depended on constant military spending. Spain was dominant, but domination created enemies, and Spain's leaders increasingly faced a choice every empire eventually faces. Do you invest in building a resilient economy at home? Or do you use imperial wealth to fund wars, prestige, and control abroad? Spain, again and again, chose the second. Chapter 4. The beginning of decline, overreach, and permanent war. Empires rarely decline because they stop winning altogether. They decline because the cost of winning becomes too high. Spain's empire was enormous. It included territories in Europe like the Netherlands, which became a central battleground. The Dutch Revolt, part political, part religious, part economic, became a long, draining conflict. Spain poured money and troops into trying to hold territory that did not want to be held. Then came England. In 1588, Spain launched the Spanish Armada, an ambitious attempt to challenge English power. The Armada's failure became a symbol not because it ended Spain's power overnight, but because it revealed limits. Storms, logistics, planning failures, and resistance combined to turn an enormous investment into a painful defeat. Spain could still fight, but it was fighting too many wars, too often, across too much territory. This is the trap of overextension. Commitments expand faster than capacity, and once that happens, every new crisis forces the empire to borrow more, tax more, and strain more. Chapter 5. Silver as a curse. Inflation, dependency, and mismanagement. Spain's empire is often imagined as a river of gold, but history shows something more ironic. The very wealth Spain extracted helped undermine its long-term stability. Silver poured into Spain, and prices began to rise across Europe. This price revolution, an extended period of inflation, made goods more expensive and destabilized economies. Spain, rather than building a diversified productive base, often relied on imported goods paid for with silver. Spain became rich, and then bought what it needed instead of producing it. That meant Spanish industries did not grow as strong as they could have. It meant other European economies benefited from Spanish silver, as Spain paid for their manufactures. Spain also borrowed heavily. Why borrow when you have silver? Because empire is expensive. Wars are expensive. Administration is expensive. And rulers often spent future wealth before it arrived. Spain became a nation that looked wealthy while repeatedly approaching insolvency. Debt piled up. And when lenders began to doubt Spain's ability to repay, the costs rose further. An empire built on extraction can create the illusion of endless wealth, but extraction is not the same as sustainable prosperity. Chapter 6. Political strain, bureaucracy, elites, and internal friction. Spain's empire required bureaucracy, and bureaucracy required money, loyalty, and coordination. As the imperial machine grew, it developed layers of administration that could become slow, corrupt, or disconnected from local realities. Elites competed for favor. Court politics consumed attention. Regional identities within Spain remained complex. Spain wasn't a uniform nation-state the way modern countries imagine themselves. It contained strong regional traditions and tensions. Maintaining unity required constant negotiation and sometimes repression. When an empire begins to strain, internal politics often becomes more rigid and more polarized. People search for scapegoats. Institutions become defensive. Reforms become harder. At the moment you most need flexibility, your system often becomes least capable of it. Chapter 7. The world changes. Rising rivals and a shifting order. Spain did not decline in a vacuum. Other powers rose. England expanded maritime influence. The Dutch built a commercial empire. France became a dominant land power. Spain's competitors learned from Spain's methods: naval power, trade networks, colonial expansion, and adapted, sometimes more efficiently. Meanwhile, the balance of global trade evolved. Spain's monopoly systems faced smuggling, piracy, and competition. Its control over the seas became contested. Empire is always a race. And Spain, after a certain point, was running harder just to stay in place. Chapter 8. The breaking points: succession, war, and loss. By the late 1600s and early 1700s, Spain's decline became unavoidable. The War of the Spanish Succession was not just a war over a crown. It was a war over the European balance of power. Spain lost key European territories. Its influence shrank. The empire still existed, but the era of uncontested Spanish dominance was over. Spain's global role changed from leader to contender, often reacting to events rather than shaping them. Then, in the centuries that followed, independence movements swept the Americas. Spain's colonial world unraveled. What had been built in conquest was lost through history's most relentless force: change. Part 2. The Parallel Question. America and the Shape of Empire. Chapter 9. America's Rise. Industry, War, and Global Order. The United States did not build an empire in the exact same way Spain did, but it did rise from the periphery to global dominance. In the 1800s, America expanded across a continent. In the early 1900s, it became an industrial giant. And after World War II, it emerged as the central power in a new global order. American influence spread through military alliances, global finance, trade networks, culture, technology, and institutions that shaped international rules. In Spain's day, power traveled by ship and sword. In America's era, power travels through aircraft carriers, currency systems, supply chains, and digital infrastructure. Different tools, similar principle: the ability to shape the world beyond your borders. Chapter 10. Military Overreach. When commitments multiply, Spain fought wars across Europe and defended far-flung colonies. The United States maintains global commitments that span oceans. Military bases, alliance guarantees, strategic competition across multiple regions at once. For decades, the U.S. benefited from being the dominant power in a favorable world order. But long wars test empires. Spain learned that in the Netherlands. America learned it in protracted conflicts where goals shifted, costs rose, and public trust eroded. The most important similarity isn't any single war. It's the structural pressure. When commitments expand faster than resources, politics, and public patience can support. Chapter 11. Economic Parallels. Silver and debt. Spain relied on silver flows and borrowing. America's economy is far more complex and productive than Spain's was. But modern systems have their own vulnerabilities. Debt, public and private, becomes easier to grow during stable times, but it becomes harder to manage during crises. Spain borrowed against future treasure. Modern states borrow against future growth. And the danger appears when confidence shifts, when markets, citizens, or rivals begin to doubt long-term sustainability. This doesn't mean collapse is inevitable, but it does mean that financial structure matters. Chapter 12. Inequality and Internal Strain. As empires expand, wealth often concentrates. In Spain, imperial wealth flowed through elites and court structures. In modern systems, wealth can concentrate through finance, property, and institutional advantage. When inequality rises, internal unity weakens, trust declines, polarization grows, reform becomes harder. This is not unique to Spain or America. It is an empire pattern. A powerful state can manage external rivals more easily than it can manage internal fragmentation. Chapter 13. Rising Competitors. The Shifting Global Stage. Spain faced the rise of England, the Dutch, and France. America faces strategic competition from major powers in a far more interconnected world. Competition isn't only military, it's technological, economic, narrative, and cultural. And like Spain, the United States now operates in a world where rivals have learned, adapted, and built alternatives. The global order that favored U.S. dominance is not disappearing overnight, but it is changing. And that change is the environment where imperial decline, if it happens, usually begins. Part 3 Lessons, Differences, and the Big Question. Chapter 14 Why History Doesn't Repeat, but Often Rhymes. At this point, it's important to be careful. Spain is not America. Spain's economy was far less diversified. Its institutions were different. Its technology was different. Its rivals were different. And yet, the parallels still matter because they operate at the level of incentives. Overextension, financial dependency, internal polarization, rising competitors, institutional rigidity, in moments requiring reform. These are not Spanish problems. They are empire problems. Chapter 15. Can America avoid Spain's fate? Spain's decline was not destiny. It was shaped by choices, priorities, and structural constraints. The United States has advantages Spain never had. A large, innovative economy, stronger institutions than many historical empires, geographic insulation, a global currency role, enormous human capital, but advantages are not guarantees. Empires decline when they fail to adapt, when they assume the rules of yesterday will protect them tomorrow. So the question becomes this: can the United States invest enough in domestic strength, education, infrastructure, cohesion, while managing global commitments responsibly? Can it reform financial and political systems before crisis forces reform? Can it maintain leadership through legitimacy and partnerships, rather than through exhaustion and overreach? History doesn't give prophecy, it gives warnings. And Spain's story warns that immense power can coexist with slow decline long before people admit it's happening. Final scene: the globe turns again. The globe turns again. Spain's empire once spanned oceans. Its ships carried silver that reshaped the world. Its banners flew across continents. Now those maps are history. The United States stands in a different era, with different tools, facing different challenges, under the same law that governs every great power: adapt or decline. History is not a judge, it is a mirror. The Spanish Empire remains one of the clearest reflections of what happens when wealth becomes dependency, when ambition becomes overreach, and when power becomes assumption. The future is not written, but the patterns are there if we are willing to look. Thank you for watching.